Please be seated. The jury is present in the courtroom once again. And ladies and gentlemen, did you follow all of my instructions during our brief recess?
Yes, ma'am.
Is anyone aware of any violations of any of my instructions? No. All right, cross-examination, you may proceed.
Ms. Cast, I understood from your prior testimony that you had been dating Mr. Hembry for approximately 5 months at the time of his death. Is that correct?
No.
No?
What's
What's the time frame?
I was dating him for 10 months
10 months.
at the incident, yes.
Okay. How long had you actually lived in the home?
Since July,
July of 2012.
before, yes.
Okay. So you were actually living in the home on August 5th, 2012. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, on August 5th, 2012, that was the incident that you told the state about where you claimed that you missed the first part about it being related to what Mr. Hembry may or may not have done regarding Mr. Woodward's chicken. But if I understood your testimony, you were claiming at that point in time that there were some threats made against your children. Is that correct?
Our children collectively, yes.
Your children collectively. I think what you... Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can refresh your memory. Isn't it in fact that the office... The people that were present at that included you, Mr. Hembry, Mr. You pronounce it Picor, is that correct?
Pichor, yes.
Pichor.
I don't remember, but
I've heard various things. Pichor.
yes, sir.
That would be Roger Pichor.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you, Gary Hembry, Roger Picor, Tim Blake, Carrie Blake, also Mr. Woodward, Billy Woodward, correct?
Yes, sir.
Barbara Woodward was there as well, wasn't she not?
I don't remember.
Okay. Isn't it also a fact that two of the neighbors that weren't generally involved in this dispute between your all's group and the Woodwards, the Crows, were also present, Mr. and Mrs. Crow?
I remember two neighbors. I don't remember who they were.
Okay. But what was at dispute on that particular time frame is that, well, your testimony was when you walked out in that, all you had really observed as your initial was Roger Picor yelling and making threats toward Mr. Woodward. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You hadn't seen what occurred before.
I heard shouting, did not see anything.
Okay. And could you identify who was shouting at who or who started the shouting or anything of that nature?
Until I got outside, no.
Okay. So when you were there, it's pretty much Roger Picor shouting threats at Mr. Woodward.
Yes, sir.
And at that point in time, Mr. Woodward was still just coming from his residence toward the street in front of your all's home. Isn't that correct?
I don't recall which way he was coming. I remember him headed toward my residence.
Okay. Now, essentially, what was being shouted back and forth at that point was various threats about, let's goes about 6'4", about 280, right?
Yes, sir.
So he was significantly bigger than both Mr. Hembry and Mr. Woodward. Is that correct?
Mr. Hembry, I know for sure. I don't remember.
Well,
I don't remember being that close to Mr. Woodward.
okay. All right. Well, Mr. Hembry around this time weighed pretty close to 200 pounds, did he not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and he was about 5'10", 5'11", something like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you've got Mr. Hembry, who's 5'10", 5'11", 200 pounds. You've got Roger Pecor, who's 6'4", 280 pounds. And you've got Mr. Woodward, who's about 5'8", 165 pounds. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And yet Mr. Woodward was saying to Mr. Hembry, come on out. You want to fight. You want to cause trouble. Come out on the street. We'll settle this. And Mr. Hembry was yelling back at him, you come into my yard. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Pecor is saying, if you want to fight somebody, fight me, not Mr. Hembry. Right?
Yes, sir.
And so he was getting in, and he was offering to stand in for Mr. Hembry in this fight.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Carrie Blake was coming out, and she was also yelling and saying, yeah, come, fight me. Come into our yard, fight me. Correct?
I remember her shouting. I don't remember what she was shouting.
Okay. Now, you all made a claim that Mr. Woodward lifted up his shirt at this point and you could see a gun. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Woodward and his family and the Crows disputed that he had a gun, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically it was your group accusing Mr. Woodward of something, and Mr. Woodward and the other neighbors saying that it was a false accusation, correct?
Yes, sir.
There were no threats to disembowel anyone, much less your children, on September 5th, was there?
I remember that is exactly what was said.
Oh, well, let me see if I can refresh your recollection. Do you recall writing out a sworn statement to the police?
Actually, I don't.
Well, may I judge?
You may.
That's your signature on this statement on September 5th about this incident?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that no one... Well, I object if he's asking about... at all from you about any threats against your children, is there?
No, there is not.
Now, this is your statement about what happened to the police. I would think that the most important thing to you as a mother is if someone had threatened your children. Wouldn't that be fair?
I was more concerned about the gun.
Oh, and you didn't think it was important to say anything about disemboweling. Is that right?
Both sides were shouting things.
Mm-hmm. There was another incident on August 11th involving your all's gang and the Woodwards, correct?
I don't recall.
Well, do you recall a point in time where you threatened to have Ava Woodward, Mr. Woodward's 12-year-old daughter, kidnapped and raped and threatened to burn their house while they slept?
I never said that.
You never said that. And do you recall that in response to your statement, Carrie Blake picked up the theme and made threats to hire a big black man to anally rape Ava?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that?
No.
And do you remember that was in response to your all statements, that there was a threat to disembowel you and Carrie?
No. That's not
Let me see
how I
if I can
remember.
refresh your recollection about that one. Copy of portion of your petition for injunction. Isn't there that you claim, the only time that any threats to disembowel anybody was made, and that's your statement, and you're claiming that that was directed toward you and Carrie in response to threats you had made against the Woodwards.
I guess, yes.
Okay. Well, that's your sworn statement. That's your handwriting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's your signature on the end of that, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And this is part of your claim asking for protection from the court, right?
Yes, it is.
Now, does that refresh your recollection about your threats to have Ava Woodward raped?
I would never say that.
You'd never said that.
Nope.
Have you ever seen the video of the surveillance of that?
No, I have not.
Okay. State never showed you any of that. At that point in time, the Woodwards had set up their surveillance, correct?
Yes, sir.
They actually bought and set up the surveillance as a response to your all's false claims that Mr. Woodward was armed on the 5th. So in response to that, to protect their family against more false claims by your group, they put up a surveillance camera. Isn't that true?
I don't know why they put up a surveillance camera.
Well, you certainly were aware of the surveillance camera.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yes, I was. It was aimed at my daughter's bedroom windows.
Mm-hmm. And again, just so I'm clear, no one has ever shown you the video of yours and Kim's threats that were recorded, yours and Carrie's threats that were recorded on August 11th.
No, sir.
Okay. But certainly, you're claiming that that's not your voice making those threats.
I've never seen it.
And you certainly would never make threats of that nature, would you?
There were a lot of threats made.
Well, let's talk about you making threats to burn the Woodward home while they
I never made
slept.
that threat.
How about your threat to have Ava kidnapped
I didn't make that threat either.
and raped?
That is not what I do not remember ever saying that.
On August 12th, Barbara Woodward requested you to have your children stop taunting and harassing his children. Do you recall that?
I remember her asking to have the children. I don't remember exactly what she asked me, but I do remember her asking me something about the children.
And your response was you would have your kids harass Ava until she just couldn't function anymore, if that's what it took. Right?
I don't remember that.
Isn't it a fact at this point in time, you, Carrie Blake, Tim Blake, Roger Pecchior, Jessica Nobles, Gary Hembry, all were working on an almost daily basis to taunt and harass the Woodwards, in particular Billy Woodward, in an attempt to get him to break?
No.
Isn't it in fact that it was your all's belief that because you believed he suffered from PTSD, that he was susceptible to this type of taunting and harassment, and that would cause him to break?
Absolutely not.
Were you aware of the fact that he allegedly had PTSD?
I was aware that he had some problems, but I didn't know in particular what they were.
Any details? Isn't one of the things that your all's group consistently taunted him and harassed him about was his military service and his problems as a result of his military service?
Myself, no.
How about harassment?
I don't remember. Both were arguing all the time.
Were you present on August 23rd when Roger Piccior threatened Mr. Woodward's father with a baseball bat?
I don't remember that.
Now, the state had asked you about the day of the injunction, and you had filed an injunction claiming repeat violence by Mr. Woodward against you. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the Woodwards had mistakenly filed an injunction for repeat violence instead of stalking for their grounds as an injunction against you, correct?
I have no idea what they filed for.
Well, you were served with a copy of their injunction, were you not?
Yes, sir.
That was an injunction claiming repeat violence, was it not?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
You may.
Isn't this a copy of the injunction that was served on you?
Don't remember.
Okay. Isn't this an injunction for repeat violence?
That's what it says.
Okay. And essentially what happened, without hearing any evidence, the judge ruled that the injunctions were legally insufficient and denied all of your all's relief, correct?
We were all denied, yes.
And there was no testimony taken. None of the witnesses that were there, none of the video that the Woodwards had brought was looked at by the judge. Basically, the judge just said these petitions are legally insufficient, correct?
I don't remember why he said we didn't get it.
Again, didn't you sign?
You may.
Isn't that the basis of what you all had to sign for at the end of this process, saying it was legally insufficient?
I was instructed to file for a restraining order by law enforcement. Wasn't familiar with it.
That's very interesting. It's not the question I asked you. Isn't the basis of the judge's ruling, which was given to you and you signed for at the end of the process, was that the petitions were legally insufficient?
I don't remember why he didn't
Hold on,
give them
hold
to
on,
us.
ma'am. Hold on. What is the legal basis of an
Asked
objection?
and answered, and calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Now, it's your claim that after that, if I understood what you were claiming, is that Mr. Woodward just kind of out of the blue ran over toward Mr. Hembry and attacked him. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it a fact that as soon as Mr. Woodward exited the courthouse, Mr. Hembry reassumed the type of taunting and statements toward him?
Absolutely not.
And it was Mr. Woodward reacting to Mr. Hembry's statements and some of your statements directed toward him that caused the altercation.
No.
As a matter of fact, you got right in the middle of it
Yes, I
between the
did.
two of them. And you were yelling and screaming, and part of your efforts in the middle of this burned Mr. Woodward with a cigarette.
I did, yes.
Okay. And then you also got into it with Barbara Woodward and Ann Woodward. You left that after burning Mr. Woodward with a cigarette and then got and confronted them and got in their face. Isn't that true?
No.
And that's when Mr. Woodward Sr. separated you from his wife and daughter-in-law. Isn't that correct?
No.
And it was in the middle of this melee that a bystander basically sprayed you all with mace, which stopped everything.
Yes, sir.
Now, let's move up to you. Well, isn't it, in fact, on August 29th, which is actually the day of the injunction hearing, that Mr. Piccior, yourself, Gary, and one other, Jessica, I believe, one other unidentified female, were in the street taunting the Woodwards, prompting Lydia Crow, your neighbor, to call the police.
I don't remember that.
Isn't it the fact that after the injunction hearing, you, Mr. Pecor, Mr. Hembry, Mr. Blake, and Carrie Blake got into a yelling thing against the neighbors that had been there to testify on behalf of the Woodwards, threatening them, the neighbors.
That's not how I remember it.
Were you present on September 1st involving the incident with Mr. Pecor, Roger Pecor, and the Woodwards?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, let's go to September 2nd. You remember the barbecue, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's talk about the barbecue. Where were you when Tim Blake decided to serenade the Woodward house with his version of the Charlie Daniels song, Simple Man? You recall that?
I don't.
You recall him yelling or sing-songing the lyrics? I'd take a big tall tree and a short piece of rope. I'd hang him up high and let them swing till the sun goes down. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You better watch where you go and remember where you've been. That's the way I see it. I'm a simple man. Because in my house, I got a 12-gauge shotgun waiting on the other side. Have to fight? Fight! Just put him on the knees and tie him to the stump and blow him the fuck away. Bang. recall that?
No, I don't.
Do you recall let's see. Well, let's see. You do acknowledge that you were present when two people were mooning the Woodward house. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose of that?
I have no idea.
Just a friendly neighborly gesture?
I had a bunch of kids. I had a bunch of barbecue food and cake and alcohol. I don't know why.
Nothing goes better with barbecue and alcohol than mooning somebody, right?
No.
Well, you certainly didn't do anything. You were right there and you didn't do anything to stop it, did you?
It was already done by the time I had seen it.
You were amused by it. You're sitting there laughing about it, aren't you?
I'm trying to remember.
Were you there around 10 o'clock when several people came down and tried to entice Mr. Woodward out of his home so that it can go down?
No.
No? Yelling at, hey man, it's finally going down. He ain't coming out. He ain't coming out. He's got stinking in his hair. He's got stinking in his ass. Remember that?
No.
Do you remember anybody burning anything that evening?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you part of the group that was yelling KKK, white power, burn baby burn?
No.
Who was that?
It was the teenage boys
The teenage boys.
in the red truck, yes.
And they were doing that as they were burning something in the area directly across from the Woodward house, correct?
No, it was not.
Was not?
It was in the end of our driveway, which is not directly in front of the Woodward house.
What's the purpose of this burn baby burn white power? What was that all about? Why was this being burned, if not
They were
directed toward the
teenage
Woodwards?
boys. I don't know.
Well, you were there, and you certainly didn't do anything to stop that or complain about that, correct?
No.
Are you one of the female voices that's encouraging them?
Actually, no.
Were you one of the female voices that were joining in with these calls of white power?
No, I was.
Were you possibly the person who had said, let's see if I can find, nobody knows you're a racist? Was that your voice or some other female voice?
It must have been someone else.
Do you recall who said that?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Do you recall Jessica Nobles complaining about the fact that her car actually caught some of the collateral damage of this burning? And screaming, it's on fire, and put it out.
I don't remember that.
You may.
Do you recognize that?
Yes?
Does that refresh your recollection as to whether or not Jessica Noble's car got soot on it from that you all were burning?
That's not what that's from.
Is that what it's from?
No, it's
Some
not.
other burning incident?
You can see the truck is in disrepair, to say the least, and it's around the gas cap.
Yes. And you're saying that that was not related to Miss Noble's screaming at around 12:03:22 on the tape, "It's on fire." You can see people stamping out flames.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. So she's talking about something else that's on fire.
She must have been.
Okay. Now, are you part of the group that is shouting at the Woodward home, "Suck my dick, faggot"? Were you around then?
No.
"Fuck you, dick"?
I don't remember being outside. I remember hearing a lot of that.
A lot of that. Do you know who was doing that?
I do not.
Do you recall people yelling around this time, "I'd love for that cocksucker to come out"?
In exact words, no, I do not recall that.
Do you recall Tim Blake talking about, "If we can get him out and get him to snap, I'll fight him to the death"?
I do not remember that.
"Look how white my knuckles are. I've done it before. I can do it now"?
No, I never
Didn't
heard
hear that?
No, I did not.
Earlier in the evening, did you hear, this is before Mr. Woodward had come anywhere near your all's property, the shots of sound of gunfire, 4 distinct shots?
Yeah, is that again? Wait,
Earlier in the evening,
yes.
coming from the area of your all's property, at about 23:40:47, 4 distinct gunshots. Did you hear that?
No, sir.
And I'm going to object speculatory and conclusory about the area of gunshot.
Sustained.
Well, if I'm hearing you, you didn't hear gunshots around that time at all. Is that correct?
We had fireworks.
You had fireworks. Do you recall conversation at or around that time talking about this is going to scare the shit out of them, and talking about your fireworks? Is the bomb made?
No.
Okay. That would be about 23:46:40. Now, you said that you were down there at the time that, as you said, the boys mooned the Woodward house. So were you there when there was yelling? Again, you got a flash and burn. Tell them to fuck it while you're at it. Fuck you. Suck my dick during this mooning incident.
When I realized that the boys had mooned anybody, it was already done. And the statements that you just made were, the boys were all wrestling in the front yard and they were yelling at each other, not at the Woodwards.
So these comments that were made, and you can hear them just before they mooned them while they're down by the Woodward house, you're saying aren't related to the mooning incident at all.
It was our front yard where our barbecue was, absolutely, and the boys were arguing amongst themselves because they were wrestling.
Now, you had talked, the state had asked you about alcohol use. Was there also marijuana use that night?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Did you hear people yelling about weed and hold my weed and things of that nature?
The teenage boys, yes. I remember yelling at one of them in particular.
Gary Hembry actually had rolling papers in his pocket. Did you know that?
I was aware, yes.
Okay. Had he been smoking marijuana earlier that evening?
That night, I did not witness him smoking.
Okay. Other people smoking marijuana around there that you're aware of?
No,
Other drug use?
not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So what you were aware of is everybody was intoxicated.
We were all drinking, yes.
Okay. And is that, your intoxication, is that a justification for the way you all were acting toward the Woodwards?
I can't tell you why anybody was acting anyway.
How about you? Can you tell me how you were acting?
Absolutely, I can tell you how I was acting.
Okay. Was your alcohol intoxication your excuse for the way you were acting that night?
I was not acting like anything but a mother having a barbecue that night. And I hear myself reprimanding my children a couple of times.
Okay. Now, around 2450, do you recall conversation, and part of what was said is, I'm going to get a bat, stay here. She's bitching at me to knock the shit out of him. Roger Pecor saying, I'm here offering $1. Roger saying, you just got your ass fucked. In return, you get to shoot him with something that didn't hurt. Roger saying, you just got your ass whooped. And a woman's voice saying, you can't deny it. You're a threat, Roger, like they claim. Were you present during that?
How you're saying it? Absolutely not.
Okay.
I was present for a discussion kind of like that, but you're taking it out of context, and it had nothing to do with the Woodwards. Once again, the boys were all fighting like gladiators back and forth, and they were threatening each other.
Okay. Were you there when Tim Blake and Roger Pecor were having a conversation? Come on, buddy, we'll go now. We're going together. We're going now. Suit up. And a woman's voice says, where? Is that you that's the woman's voice or someone else?
To get cigarettes and beer. And no, it was not my voice.
It's cigarettes and beer.
Yes.
All three of it, get it on, get it on. All three of us, let's go. We're going to end this. That's to get cigarettes and beer.
That's not what was said.
And then a woman's voice yells out, oh my God, they're going to do it. Was that you?
I don't know.
Why would somebody yell out, and, oh my God, you're going to do it if they're getting cigarettes and beer?
again, there were a bunch of people having different conversations with each other, and the surveillance camera was picking up conversations with other people that didn't even have to do with the Woodwards whatsoever.
Well, you would agree that there had been a number of problems associated with the group that was at your party against the Woodwards for almost a month. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And there was definitely, no question, a lot of comments directed directly at the Woodwards and Mr. Woodward in particular. Isn't that true? That evening?
No, that evening, no.
That evening, no?
We did not believe he was even home.
Then why are
There were no
people
lights on.
shouting out plastic G.I. Joe? Wasn't that one of the comments that was directed toward Mr. Woodward?
I did not say that.
You did not say that?
I
Did you
didn't
hear
hear
it?
it.
You didn't hear it? So if that was being directed toward the Woodwards, you were just unaware of it.
Like I said, the boys were all fighting with each other, amongst each other. Everybody was shouting at each other. There were a couple of different not groups, it was one-on-one. There were, I would say at one point, there were 3, because there were 6 boys. And Roger as well. And they were all battling with each other. They were, talking to each other like guys do, just being boys. Had nothing to do with the Woodwards at all. It was totally taken out of context.
Well, let's start with you saying you were unaware, or you felt your group was unaware that Mr. Woodward was there. Isn't it a fact that as soon as he got home, that's when the conduct against he, in particular, Tim Brake and this little serenade, seconds after he got out of his truck and walked into his home?
I wasn't even aware that he even went home and that nobody told me. I didn't know. I really believed he wasn't there.
Okay. And so it's your feeling that all of these things that were audible, in some cases visible, on the surveillance tape were taken out of context.
Absolutely, 100%.
And so the Woodwards shouldn't have been concerned at all, particularly given the earlier threats to have their daughter raped or their house burned. None of that should have caused them to believe that any of these comments were being directed toward them, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
They should have just understood that you guys were just a bunch of drunks having a good time that thought that it was a good time to yell and scream threats and insults at your neighbors, right?
They were yelling threats and screaming at each other. They were teenage boys, and we were having a barbecue.
Is Roger Pecor a teenage boy?
I can't.
Is Roger Pecor a teenage boy?
No, sir.
Is
He wasn't.
Gary Hembry a teenage boy?
No, sir.
Is Bruce Timothy Blake a teenage boy?
No.
Are you a teenage boy?
No.
Is Carrie Blake a teenage boy?
No.
So it wasn't just the teenage boys that were involved in this. It was grown men as well as the teenage boys.
Watching the teenage boys fight amongst themselves. Yes, we were all watching the boys beat each other up, and we thought it was funny because we were drinking. And it was the first time we had chilled out in a long time, and we were having a good time.
So it's part of the fun to call people fucking cunts, faggot.
They're boys. They were boys, teenage boys, beating each other up.
Well, let's talk about your memory of if I understood your claims. Well, first of all, so it's your testimony, I think you said it in direct, but it's your position that there were never any words directed at the Woodwards in your presence at all.
That's not what I said.
Okay. What was directed at the Woodwards in your presence then?
Exactly, I could not say.
Okay. Now, if I understood your sequence of events, you were saying that you were in the house when you first heard some, what you believe to be gunshots. Is that correct?
There were gunshots, and yes, I was inside the house.
Okay. Well, I mean, you had said, thought you had said, Mr. Embry told you that you were wrong. It wasn't gunshots, but you were convinced they were gunshots, and ultimately you were correct, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And that's what caused you to go out.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, have you ever listened or seen the video of the surveillance and listened to the gunshot pattern during this incident?
Just recently, yes.
Okay. Isn't it a fact that basically the first gunshot involving Mr. Woodward, 3747 on the surveillance, there's a gunshot, 4 seconds later, a second gunshot, 2 seconds later, you can hear a metal object hit the ground. 3 seconds later, there's a third gunshot.
Is that a question?
5 seconds later, it's a long question, but I'm going to get through it. 5 seconds later, there are 13 shots, all without a pause. About 30 seconds after that, there are 5 shots without a pause, followed by 10 shots without a pause. The whole time,
Object, compound question, and it really wasn't a question at all.
I haven't finished it yet.
I object to the form of the question. It's compound.
Okay, overruled. You may finish your question.
Thank you. That the whole gunshot sequence took approximately 72 seconds, minute and 12 seconds, from first shot to last shot.
I didn't pay attention that much to it.
Okay.
Honestly, it was disgusting and scary, and I wasn't looking at the time.
Well, let me just, again, you're saying that well, let me ask you this. Isn't it a fact that Mr. Hembry actually sustained 15 wounds during the shooting? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Okay. Basically, would you agree that in the gunshot pattern, the last 15 shots would have had to have been directed toward Mr. Hembry if he suffered 15 wounds?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Is less than 15 seconds.
Objection is to the form of the question. It assumes the witness has knowledge as to the time she's denied.
Answer.
Anything.
Okay. Well, in this time period, whatever it was, it's your testimony that you and Mr. Hembry came out of the doorway. You had a conversation with Justin Piccior, correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Piccior, you're saying, was in your carport at that time, and you're asking him where your son was, correct?
He was in my laundry room, which is an independent room at the back of the carport with walls, and I had to go in the doorway. He wasn't in the carport, is
Okay.
what I'm saying.
So he wasn't even in the carport area. He was even further removed. He was in the laundry room when you had this conversation with him.
Yeah, but I didn't move from the doorway.
He's not actually at the Blake residence under a car?
Obviously not if I was talking to him.
Obviously not. And now, if I understood your testimony correctly, once the shot started going, you crawled under your car. Is that correct?
Somehow I wound up under my car.
Okay. Now, may I approach you quick?
You may.
I may approach you with.
You may.
Do you recognize the scene depicted in these two photographs?
Mr. Eisenberger, those have been marked for identification. Can you
I-
identify what?
I can't. It's defendants either L for identification and K for identification.
Thank you.
Okay.
It appears that you're the person being talked to L for identification. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you're seated at this point in the same area that is some other photographs of that area, and K for identification. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
You're seated at what would be the orange bench right next to the blue bench. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you ever see this partial golf club, broken off golf club, earlier in the evening?
No, I did not.
Did you see how it ended up on that bench by the area where all this occurred?
No.
Did you see who was carrying it or using it, or who had possession of that earlier in the evening?
I don't remember it at all.
Okay. Do you remember seeing any baseball bats?
That night?
Yep.
No.
Okay. So, okay. May I put you witness?
You may.
You recall saying the states 122, 123, and 124 that evening.
I don't even know what I'm looking at. Sorry.
The spike thing.
Okay. It's a spike thing.
Yes, you recall seeing it that evening.
No.
Who had that? If you
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you have any idea what its purpose is hanging there by the grill?
No. It doesn't look like anything important.
Now, was there ever a point in time where the police ever searched your home that evening?
I believe they told me I wasn't allowed to go in the home. I wasn't aware that anyone was searching my home.
Okay, did you ever see anybody do that?
No.
Okay. Did you ever see them go into the Piccior home, the Core or Ecor, however you
That
pronounce
was my home.
it? Oh, I'm sorry. That was the same home? Okay. Did you ever see them go into the Blake home?
I did not.
Final question that I have for you, ma'am. Have you ever been convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude?
Yes, sir.
How many times?
That I was arrested for
You were convicted of a crime involving moral
one
turpitude?
time.
One time. All right, thank you.
Crime was retail theft,
Yes, sir.
and conviction happened in May of last year.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to ask you about, or follow up on some questions that Mr. Eisenmenger was asking. As you're under the car, are you aware who was shot last? In other words, he's asking you to talk about the times in the shootings. And my question is more broad than that. Do you have a recollection the shooting has ended and I know where that last shot went?
No.
Okay. All right. So what you've told us is what you can recall from under that car, right?
Right.
And your view is looking out from under the car?
And over Gary.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see outside easily?
No.
Any recross examination?
No recross, however, I would like the witness available for recall.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You may step down at this time. You are subject to recall. Thank you. May I have the attorney's approach, please? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our lunch recess. I'll ask that you all come back at 1:25, and so we can get started at 1:30. So make sure that you also follow all of my instructions during the lunch recess. You all have a nice lunch. Thank you.